everything about it is to be explained in terms of its telos or goal. It may also be responded that anything which can be converted into God cannot be finally different from God. Since all potentiality has to be grounded in some actuality, there is also a sense in which the universe is already implicitly God. God is, as actually possessing deity, does not exist. God as actually possessing deity does not exist, but is an ideal, is always becoming. But God as the whole universe tending towards deity does exist.
So God is not the same thing as deity? Deity is something that God aspires to?
Well, it depends upon how you're thinking about it here. God as the whole universe tending towards deity. Well, let's see what it said earlier here.
Well, it's synonymous with being. That's what we mean by being. Being is dynamic. It's not.
Okay, I think you're getting at it there. Being is dynamic. God as the whole universe tending towards deity does exist. Okay, enough of that section, teleological.
Actually, is God really being? Because if you're going to argue dynamics, then it should be becoming. And being is more of a sort of static, eternal state.
Not when God being is person, and God is person, which is the element that's not even been mentioned yet.
And not without the human concept of the passage of time. There is no difference between being and becoming. It's our notion.
Right.
Strictly ours.
And that's a good point that I don't think is even covered in this.
And it's illusory. But it doesn't mean that the substance isn't God.
And by the way, if you think that I understand all of this, you're wrong.
But you sound
Maybe
brilliant.
I could get some light shed on it by the comments tonight, actually. The unity of the cosmos. At least as it is usually understood, the two terms nature and God have different and contrasting meanings. If they're identified, it follows that one or both words are being used in a different way than usual. That nature is more like God than commonly thought, or God is more like nature than commonly thought. With respect to the cosmos, this may be seen in the stress that pantheists typically put on the unity of the cosmos. A distinction may be drawn between distributive pantheism, the view that each thing in the cosmos is divine, and collective pantheism, the view that the cosmos as a whole is divine. And if polytheism in general is coherent, there's no reason in principle why we should exclude the possibility of distributive pantheism. But as in a pursuit of explanatory unity and coherence, belief in many gods tends historically, you should be good on this one by the way, Sam, as in pursuit of explanatory unity and coherence, belief in many gods tends historically to give way to belief in single deity. While it would be technically possible to identify the universe with a collection of deities, in practice, monism tends to win out, and it's been characteristic of pantheists to stress heavily the unity of nature. Thus, pantheism typically asserts a twofold identity. As well as the unity of God and nature, it urges the unity of all things with each other. The nature of the cosmos. Besides commitment to the view that the cosmos as a whole is divine, pantheists as a general class hold no specific theory about the nature of that cosmos. Much to my surprise. There are three main traditions, however. Physicalism. Many pantheists argue that physical conceptions are adequate to explain the entire cosmos. This is an ancient form of pantheism, found, for example, in the Stoics, for whom only bodies can be said to exist. Soul, they understood as nothing more than a specific form of pneuma, or breath, the active power to be found throughout nature. This is also a form of pantheism popular today, often termed scientific or naturalistic pantheism. Such worldviews make no ontological commitments beyond those sanctioned by empirical science. 2. Idealism. During the 19th century, when pantheism was at its most popular, the dominant form was idealist. According to absolute idealism, all that exists is a single spiritual entity of which the physical world must be understood as a partial manifestation. The search for that which may be asserted without condition or qualification leads to the conclusion that all variety is the expression of an underlying unity, and that nothing can be real in the absence of mind or spirit.
And that underlying unity is Spinoza's substance.
What's that?
The underlying unity is Spinoza's substance.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, I think you're right. I think you're right. On some versions of this sort of doctrine, the physical world starts to look more like an appearance of the ultimate spiritual or possibly unknown reality beneath it. While it certainly amounts to a view that there exists nothing besides God, in view of its basic denial of the reality of the world we all experience, idealism hardly seems like a kind of pantheism. I couldn't agree more. 3, the dual aspect theory. The pantheism of Spinoza is neither of these types. It's neither physicalism nor idealism. For Spinoza, there's one thing that expresses itself, or that may be understood in 2 different ways, either as thinking substance or as extended substance. The principal difficulty of any such position is to further specify that ambiguous relationship while simultaneously avoiding the twin but opposed pitfalls of reductionism and dualism. That's in your glossary too. Pantheists hold that whatever exists falls within God. This places them in disagreement with any theory of the supernatural, but this opposition must not be misunderstood, for to say that there is no supernatural realm is not in itself to delineate the range of what is natural. This is important. For while many contemporary pantheists have been epistemologically conservative, there is no reason in principle why the pantheist should oppose the idea of that which is epistemically transcendent to us. No reason, that is, why he should seek to limit the compass of the universe to the known universe. For example, Spinoza held not only that the realms of thought and extension must stretch indefinitely beyond our finite grasp, but that, as well as in the 2 known realms of thought and extension, the one substance must exist also in an infinity of other dimensions completely beyond our power to conceive. Spinoza was a cool cat, I think. 7, the divinity of the cosmos. One of the strongest, most commonly raised objections to pantheism is that it is simply inappropriate to call the universe God. Schopenhauer complained that pantheism is only a euphemism for atheism. For to call the world God is not to explain it, it's only to enrich our language with a superfluous synonym for the word world. It's been described as nothing more than materialism grown sentimental. And more recently, Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion complained pantheism is sexed up atheism. It's clear that the more naturalistically the cosmos is conceived, the stronger that objection must seem. But to estimate more carefully its validity, the following 6 sections take in turn a number of characteristics which the cosmos possesses, or might possess, and which could be thought to make it divine. Arguments for the cosmos being divine. These are, we proceed from the least to the most contested, noting that not all pantheists agree on all marks. Say that again. Okay, evoking religious emotion. Most straightforwardly, it's been maintained that the one is holy, that's a capital O1. The one is holy because we feel a particular set of religious emotions towards it. On this view, all that distinguishes a pantheist from an atheist is feeling. A certain emotional reaction or connection that we feel with the universe. On the face of it, this approach put the cart before the horse. Rather than say that the one is divine, because we feel a set of religious emotions towards it, it seems more appropriate to suppose that we feel those emotions towards it because we think it's divine. I could run around in circles chasing my tail all day on that one. Next, a place in the universe at large. Religion gives meaning to human lives by assigning them a certain definite place within a grander scheme or narrative. It gives its adherents a sense of their part in a coherent universe. tells us that the universe is not a random conjunction of brute facts, but a whole in which we have our proper location. Pantheists may regard the cosmos as divine for very similar reasons. To think of oneself as part of a vast, interconnected scheme may give one a sense of being at home in the universe. It certainly does me. The infinity, the eternity, the necessity of the universe. Historically, the majority of pantheists have regarded the universe as infinite, metaphysically perfect, necessarily existent, and eternal. And taking these attributes as the characteristic marks of divinity, that's formed one very important reason for thinking the universe itself is in fact God. In more recent times, however, there have risen naturalistic or scientific forms of pantheism which reject or are neutral about these characteristics. While they remove one important set of reasons for thinking the cosmos divine, so long as others remain, the amputation in itself seems an insufficient reason to refuse the label pantheist to these views. Any methodology that limits itself to empirical science will presumably find it hard to attribute anything like infinitude or necessary existence to the cosmos. While approaches which do find a role for such features will need to be careful that they understand them in an appropriate fashion. For example, it is doubtful that mere infinite extent or infinite divisibility in space and time would be sufficient to merit that the universe be called divine. But with these caveats aside, the pantheist is not without arguments for believing the universe as a whole displays marks of metaphysical perfection. Perhaps the most commonly used argument among pantheists has been the ontological argument. As employed by classical theism, this line of argument has been much criticized, but the forms in which it has been put forward by pantheists such as Spinoza and Hegel are interestingly different. On their way of thinking, the more perfect an idea becomes, the less room there remains for any gap between it and its proof. The more perfect an idea becomes, the less room there remains for any gap between it and its proof. But no idea becomes perfect simply by defining itself to be perfect. This can be shown only by a full development of its content, amounting to nothing less than a complete philosophical system. Ineffable. A fourth feature commonly taken to mark the divinity of God is God's ineffability. If God is so much greater than anything else, anything we say of God would limit or falsify God. So we can speak at best in negatives or simply conclude that God is an ineffable mystery. Most of the Greek religions had that figured out 3,000 years ago. It would be hard to think of a line of reasoning less congenial to the rationalist spirit that's characterized many pantheists, for example, scientific pantheism. Personal. Einstein was a pantheist, but he rejected any notion of a personal God. And like Einstein, for many pantheists, rejection of a personal deity is a definitive mark or the most important element of their position as pantheists. However, it's important to distinguish between the specific question of whether God is literally a person and the more general question whether God is person-like. The issue of whether notions such as intellect, thought, consciousness, intent, etc. have any application to the divine, even if analogical or metaphorical application, it should also be recognized both that the notion of personhood is itself deeply problematic. I thought about that for a while. The notion of personhood is itself deeply problematic. And a number of traditional theists would only with considerable qualification be prepared to allow that God is personal. Are any traditional theists in the room right now?
Well, in the Bible, it's personal all the time. God gets mad, God gets vengeful.
Well, it's expressed that way in the
personal.
text, certainly.
Yes.
But what's the theology
He's
development?
perceived that, and
Yeah.
described that way.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that
It doesn't mean
That's the last
anything, but
word
if you're
from
going to be part of, chosen people, you better believe it.
Well, like in Job,
Yeah.
his friends, they're great defenders of God. They're your televangelists. They got all these grand
Yeah.
things to say about God. They're championing God,
Oh,
good old
yeah.
God, can do no wrong. Job just, he has something quite different to say. He's questioning God and challenging God. In the end, though, God says, God, if the Bible represents his friends, and when a lot of people seem to see it that way, then they're all wrong, God says. So the Bible's all wrong, God says.
There's a lot of
Job
argument
said the
about,
right things about it.
a lot of argument, even amongst Christians, as whether God is a person in the sense that we think of each other as persons.
Yeah.
These points having been made, while it's true that traditional theism has regularly opposed pantheism on the grounds that it tends to be impersonal, and is also true